Silence, one of the most important skills in a content creator's arsenal. Every single piece of media has some moments of silence within it. For filmmaking a media format where 50% of the finished product is the sound design behind it, the moments of pure silence stand out even more. It's so common within filmmaking that silence generally gets its own beat when you are detailing your instructions to actors. But you may be asking, why is silence so important, and what does silence do to provoke such a warranted effort behind it? Silence, despite noticeably being the complete absence of sound, provokes more emotions sometimes than if the scene was presented with all the sound you could possibly muster. So what does it do to the viewer that filmmakers generally plan out the silence that they are using within their films? Well, it's two things: drawing out tension and bringing more focus on the visuals. It usually does this in tandem with one another rather than the ideas being wholly separate. All of these things are grown by silence, and without it would not elicit anywhere near the same amount of emotional response. But before going into a deeper dive into how all these things work together, spoilers for these films ahead. If you haven't seen any of them, then go watch them. Seriously, go check out these works and watch them without spoilers. It ruins the fun. Also, if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. I upload once per week, and make sure to let me know what you want to see in the comments down below. Okay, now let's get into it. One of the main ways that most people think about when it comes to silence as a technique in filmmaking is drawing out the tension within a scene. We've all seen a horror film where the characters are exploring a house and the sound goes completely out, putting you on the edge of your seat. And while you may know that it's a tactic, it may have you wondering why this is done in the first place. Well, it's because silence is usually made as a way of anticipation, as quietness isn't natural for most people. We are social creatures, so silence is a void in our minds, causing anxiety. It's part of the way that we are wired. Thus, films exploit this to the max when trying to make us feel uncomfortable. This makes us feel scared, as with what I said before, horror is much scarier with the ideas that we have in our head, so with us being left in silence, our mind begins to wander. Famously, J-horror uses silence as one of its main tools for making us feel as uncomfortable as possible. Take films like 1998's Ringu, where silence is used in every single scene to an extreme degree. For example, take the scene directly after Tomoko is killed by Sadako, a scene which also uses silence to an extreme degree, when Reiko is exploring the house looking for evidence of what could have possibly happened. The entire sequence is dead silent, with the only noise that really comes through being the footsteps of Reiko as she looks around. There is not even a soundtrack playing, just pure silence with the room tone overwhelming everything else in the mix, which makes it even more surprising when it cuts to this. See, while we may not find this super shocking out of context like I've shown here, as the visual itself is not the most frightening, in context this scene is absolutely shocking. The absence of sound makes it so the loud violin screech hits even harder, so even without it not being that loud, it still feels like a jump scare. And the silence also leaves us wondering what could have possibly killed Tomoko, and whether we should be worried that this creature is still in the house with us. Silence allows the mind to wander, and this scene does it brilliantly, where it makes the big reveal even more surprising than it was in the first place. Without silence, the scene wouldn't be as effective as it was. However, this isn't the only J-horror film that uses this technique. Take 2002's Ju-on the Grudge. This film uses a similar tactic when Hitomi, the sister of the cursed Katsuya, who returns home unknowingly cursed herself. This sequence is entirely quiet, besides her footsteps and occasional talking, leaving us in our minds as we try to figure out what could be possibly going on here. She gets on the elevator and begins to write up floor by floor. It does this without drawing significant attention, rather it lets the visuals do the talking for it, which I'll get back to later. And the entire scene continues on and on like this, the silence overwhelming. Because of this, if you aren't paying full attention, you may miss the ghost boy watching her while viewing, making the realization of him being there much more frightening than if it had loud violin screech to go along with it. The silence accentuates the tension, so when we do notice the child watching her, it's much more tense than it would have been with sound. While silence does that, it does the job without the need for an overt soundtrack and may make the cue even more subtle, thus increasing the tension. And to show you how overt soundtracks can also ruin tension, there's actually an edit I found of this movie with extremely loud music. So here's the scene with an extreme soundtrack. And this is a theme throughout horror filmmaking as a whole, with one of my favorite examples of silence in horror being used in films like The Exorcist 3, which while being an okay movie overall has an excellent sequence involving a hospital and pure silence. In the film, we hear about the Gemini Killer, a deceased serial killer who has come back from the dead to murder more people. Each person who is found by the police is found decapitated with some sort of religious symbol replacing their head, such as the head of Jesus. The Gemini Killer then boasts that he's going to kill a nurse, which it then cuts to a nearby nurse doing her nightly rounds on her hospital patients. There is next to no sound, and the only thing we hear is the footsteps in her keys jingling as she opens the door. And after 10 full minutes of this overwhelming silence, maybe, just maybe, she'll be safe in the Gemini Killer's bluffing. And what a powerful scene, using tension from silence to the most extreme degree. With the context of the scene before it, we know that she's in danger, playing off Hitchcock's Law, which I described in my last video. Which, for those who don't know, is just letting the audience know that the protagonist is in danger without telling them themselves. This already builds up tension in the first place, but the silence accentuates it to as high as it could possibly be. It's a wonderfully done sequence, and the payoff is extraordinary, showing just how powerful silence can be for building tension. However, I think this tactic is even better when it's used with the other form of it, that of course being connecting to the point before, that being it's used to build tension, the tension that comes along with it enhances the visuals and raises them more to the forefront of the viewer's mind. For example, let's look at the hotel sequence in No Country for Old Men, which follows Moss, a guy who finds a drug deal gone wrong and takes the money. What he doesn't know is the money actually has a tracker within it, which is being followed by the cartel's hitman, Anton Chigurh. Thus, this once again uses Hitchcock's Law, as we know that he is in danger as Chigurh has been using the tracker, but Moss has no idea he's been followed yet. After stopping at a hotel, he realizes that the tracker is in there and tosses it out, but after doing that, it's revealed that it's already too late and that Chigurh is already there, having killed the hotel owner. This leads to one of the most silent but most aggressive sequences in the film, in which while in pure silence we see Chigurh turn off the lights, load his gun, and blow out the doorknob in the door. It does this scene in complete silence, but rather than just using it to build tension, which it most definitely does, it also gets you a closer look at to what the visuals are portraying. All the things I said are not explicitly shown, but we are able to infer all of this from the shadows alone, which if you were so focused on the soundtrack, you wouldn't really be able to understand. It also makes the visuals much more impactful, as usually while watching you are trying to balance the acts together. It's a wonderfully done sequence, as the tension is so strong that it drags the viewer directly into what Moss is experiencing, as we're picking up on every cue that he is. It makes for one of the most brutal sequences in the film, and it's grueling to watch. And because of the silence, the scene is that much more impactful and makes you focus on every little detail, adding even more to the suspense that the film was created in the first place. And the entire film is like that, with nearly the rest of the runtime being without a soundtrack in any form. It really puts you into the character's shoes more than anything else and makes for a riveting experience. But to show it's not just films that are playing off this usage of silence, let's look at how an analog horror shorts like The Oldest View also use silence to enhance the visuals. The entire short is nearly silent, besides the very basic background noises such as footsteps, the major heel turns, and the occasional song. It does build tension, but also makes it so the visual storytelling on display is much more potent. It causes you to look around more, which allows you to notice some of the scares slightly before he sees them, with one of my favorites being the giant being able to be seen in the dark. While you would still probably notice it with the soundtrack, the lack of soundtrack makes it so you might not notice more little details surrounding it, thus making the tension that much thicker, as we know he has no idea about the giant that's in the room yet. Then there's the way a lot of analog horror series present the scares, with series like Mandela Catalogue using it, where the sound design before this point is assaulting, as it overwhelms you, so when it cuts to complete silence with a slightly disturbing face, it makes it much more unsettling.
However, I think this personally suffers from one major thing that goes wrong with films that use this technique, which is that the payoff of the silence is usually not good enough to warrant the visual enhancement brought by the silence itself. It needs to have ideas that the viewer can be more intrigued by with the long wait. If you leave the visual in the silence for too long, the flaws with what you are showing start to become more and more apparent. But if it's used correctly and the visuals that they are accommodating live up to the extra level of exposure, it can bring a level of tension that wasn't there before. In conclusion, silence can be one of the most powerful filmmaking techniques for building the tension and atmosphere that you are trying to set. Silence does this by doing two important steps: drawing out tension and enhancing the visuals. These two steps usually coincide with one another, and honestly the examples that I gave for both sections can work for either section. All of these examples work with one another, as many films use both techniques at the same time to enhance the scene to make the atmosphere as strong as possible. Without it, a lot of the most powerful scenes that we have in modern horror would be nowhere near as strong as they are. And with all that being said, make sure if you haven't already to like and subscribe and let me know what you want to see next. I do take recommendations and tell me the ideas of horror videos you would like to see. And I'll see you all next week.